We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 59a. The Mishnah says, Yesh te'unos shemen u'lavona. There are some carbon minchas that require oil and frankincense. Shemen velo lavona. Some require oil and no frankincense. Lavona velo shemen. Some require frankincense and no oil. Lo lavona velo shemen. And some require no frankincense and no oil. And the Mishnah continues, Ve'elu te'unos shemen u'lavona. The following carbon minchas require oil and frankincense. Minchas hasolas, that's the fine flour carbon mincha. V'hamachavas, and the pan mincha. V'hamarcheshes, and the deep pan mincha. V'hachalos, and the loaves of carbon mincha. V'harakikin, and the wafers of carbon mincha. Minchas kohanim, the mincha brought by the kohanim. Minchas kohen Mashiach, the mincha brought by the kohen gadol. Minchas ovid kochavim, the mincha brought by idol worshippers, by non-Jews. Minchas noshim, the mincha brought by women. Minchas ha'omer, the mincha of the omer. Minchas nesachim, with regards to minchas nesachim, that's the mincha of libations. Te'una shemen ve'ein te'una lavona, that requires oil but does not require frankincense. Lechem haponim ton lavona ve'ein ton shemen, the lechem haponim that were on the shulchan, they require frankincense but not oil. And shtei halechem, the shtei halechem, that's the two loaves that are brought on Shavuos. Uminchas chote, and the mincha of the sinner. Uminchas kenos, the minchas kenos refers to the mincha of the sota. Ein te'unin lo shemen velo lavona, they do not require oil or frankincense. And Rashi explains, minchas hasolas, the fine flour mincha, de misnadev mincha stam. If somebody says he's going to donate a mincha and just says in general a mincha, maybe isaron solas, he brings an isaron, a fine flour, v'shemen ulavon, and he brings oil and frankincense, ubolula, and he mixes it, v'kometz, and he takes the kometz, the fistful, kemoshi chaya, as it is, uvididei ksiv, shemen ulavona. And in that carbon mincha, it says shemen and lavona, it says oil and frankincense. Rashi continues and notes, B'chol hanoch achrini lo ksiv lavona, and all the other ones, it doesn't say lavona, elo mi mincha soles gamrinan, but we learn from mincha soles, just like it has lavona, so to the other cases, dechsiv ba nefesh, it's written over their nefesh, umashma, and therefore it's understood to mean, dechol minchas yochid, that any mincha of an individual, to una shemen ulavona kazu, requires oil and frankincense, just like this. And Rashi continues, Hachalos v'harakikin, that's the loaves and the wafers. Ha'omer harei alai minchas mafa. This is if somebody says, it's upon me to bring a minchas mafa, a baked mincha, maybe chalos o rakikin. Then he brings loaves or wafers, kidechsiv b'vayikra, as is written in Vayikra. Ulahana choshev tarti keven to iboy chalos maisi, v'iboy rakikin maisi. The reason why it's considered like two is because if he wants, he can bring chalos. If he wants, he can bring rakikin. Uminchas noshem, the mincha of women, that simply means isha shehis nadva mincha, it simply means a woman who donates a carbon mincha. Uminchas ha'omer, and the mincha of the omer, ba nami ksiv shemen ulavona, there also it's written shemen ulavona. Kidechsiv im takrav minchas bikurim, it says in the pasuk, you're going to bring minchas bikurim, vihi minchas ha'omer, that is a reference to minchas ha'omer. Avol minchas nesachim, but the mincha of libations, lo boy lavona, that does not require frankincense, kidmefarish begemara, as will be explained in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Papa says, Kol heichod etnan, anytime the Mishnah lists carbon mincha, eser tanan, it is a total of 10. We will see Rashi in a moment, two explanations what this means. And the Gemara continues, La'afuke mid Rabbi Shimon, this comes to exclude from the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, Diamar, because Rabbi Shimon says, Mechza chalos u'mechza rakikin, half our chalos, meaning half our loaves, and half our rakikin, half our wafers, yavi, that's what he should bring, kamash malon delo, and so therefore, Rav Papa is teaching us that this is not the case. And Rashi explains, this is Rashi's first explanation of the Gemara, Kol heichod etnan hanach menachos demasnis, and all of the carbon minchas in our Mishnah, eser tanan, they are numbered at 10. Kilomar means to say, kulon bos eser chalos, means to say that you always bring 10 loaves for each of these minchas. Kedamrinan be'elu menachos, that we're going to say later on, in elu menachos. La'afuke mid Rabbi Shimon damar, and this comes to exclude Rabbi Shimon's opinion, because he says, L'kamon b'hai pirkin, he says later in this parak, ha'omer harei alai minchas mafe. If one says it's upon me to bring a minchas mafe, that's the minchas mafe that was mentioned above in Rashi with regards to the idea that the person has the choice of bringing chalos or rakikin. So Rabbi Shimon says, Imrotza yavi mechza chalos, mechza rakikin. If he wants, he can bring half chalos and half rakikin, meaning 5 chalos and 5 rakikin. That's why it is excluding the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Again, according to the Mishnah, one brings either 10 chalos or 10 rakikin. Rabbi Shimon would say 5 of each is a possibility. Kamash malon Rapapa, that's what Rapapa is teaching. The chol menachos, the Masnisin Eser Ninu, that all of the cases of Karban Mincha listed in our Mishnah, they are all situations where you bring 10 loaves. The Hach Chalos Eser Chalos, when it says Chalos in the Mishnah, it means 10 Chalos. The Hach Rakikin Eser Rakikin, when it says wafers in the Mishnah, it means 10 wafers. The Hanoch Tarti Dum Yadinach, because these two in the list are similar to the other ones in the list. And so according to the first explanation of Rashi, the discussion of Rav Papa has to do with Eser Tanan, 10 Chalos that are brought as part of the Karban Mincha. And Rashi continues with another explanation, Lishna Achrin, a second explanation. Kol heicha d'tanan od bava acheres demasnisin over perak elu menachos shetanu hai sidrei menachos demasnisin. Anytime you have a list of Karban minchas in the Mishnah, like in our Mishnah, the dinon shave, where they all have the same halachas, eser tanan, you're always going to have a list of 10 in the Mishnah, and that's if you count in our Mishnah minchas hasolas ad minchas haomer. If you count from minchas hasolas until minchas haomer, that's all of the cases of shemen and levona, oil and frankincense. You have minchas asolas is 1, machavas is 2, marcheshes is 3, chalos is 4, rekikin is 5, minchas kohanim is 6, minchas kohen mashiach is 7, minchas ovid kochavim is 8, minchas noshim is 9, and minchas omer is 10. So the list is a total of 10. According to the second explanation of Rashi, that's what Rav Papa means to say. Again, eser tanan mi minchas asolas and minchas omer. And that's la'afuke mid Rabbi Shimon. That comes to exclude Rabbi Shimon. He's actually going to say 11. The Yomar de lididei iko yud aleph. According to him, there's 11 menachos. Why? The v'minchas mafe, because again, by minchas mafe, that baked karban mincha, iko bei gimel menachos. You have over there 3 different possibilities. It's not simply chalos or rekikin. You have an additional possibility as well. Iboy kule matzos. If you want, it could be all matzos. V'iboy kule rekikin. If you want, it could be all wafers. V'iboy, and if you want, hey chalos ve'rekikin, it can be 5 of each. And so therefore you have that other possibility. It's a total of 11. And therefore, according to the second explanation of Rashi, Rav Papa is talking about the number of menachos listed in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon would have an additional 1. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the sages taught in a brayso of v'nasato oleh Hashem, and it says that you're going to place upon it oil. Rashi explains, v'nasato oleh Hashem b'minchas ha'omer kai. The pasuk is talking about minchas ha'omer, which has oil. And so the brayso continues, you're going to place upon the minchas ha'omer oil, v'lo alechem haponim shem, and you're not going to place oil on the lechem haponim. Sheyachol, because one might have thought, v'alo dinu, it's logical, uma minchas nesachim, if with regards to the mincha of libations, she'ena te'una levona, that does not require frankincense, te'una shemen, but it does require oil. So one can say, lechem haponim, the lechem haponim, shaton levona, which do require frankincense, einodin shaton shemen. Isn't it logical that oil should be required for the lechem haponim? Talmud lomar oleha, the pasuk says oleha, the same pasuk we just quoted above, in asat oleh shemen, oleha shemen velo alechem haponim shemen. It means to say, upon it, on the minchas ha'omer, there's oil, and not on the lechem haponim. V'samta oleh levona, and then it says in the pasuk, v'samta oleh levona, you're going to place upon it levona. That's talking also about the minchas ha'omer. The pasuk says, v'nosata oleh shemen, v'samta oleh levona minchahi. And so the brayso continues and says, oleh levona, v'lo al minchas nesachim levona. There's frankincense on the minchas ha'omer, but there's no frankincense on the minchas nesachim, the mincha of libations. Sheyachol, because one might have thought, v'halodinu, it's logical, u'mal lechem haponim, if by the lechem haponim, she'eno ton shemen, which do not require oil, ton levona, they do require frankincense. So minchas nesachim, the mincha of libations, sheteuna shemen, which does require oil, eno din sheteuna levona, isn't it logical that it should require levona, frankincense? Talmud lomer, the pasuk says, oleha, again it says oleha, levona, v'lo al minchas nesachim levona, upon it is levona, and not on the minchas nesachim. And finally, the brayso concludes mincha, the pasuk says the word mincha, again that's the end of the pasuk by the omer, v'nasato le'Hashem v'samto le'levona minchahi, and so it says the word mincha, that's an inclusion, because it already mentioned that it is a mincha, it's an extra word, and so l'rabos minchas shmini le'levona comes to include the minchas shmini, that's the mincha that was brought on the 8th day of the miluim. On that day they brought a mincha, and that has levona, and then the very end of the pasuk it says again it says mincha hi, lahotzi shtei halechem, that comes to exclude the shtei halechem, meaning this one and not the shtei halechem, shelo yitanu lo shemen v'lo levona. The shtei halechem does not require oil, and it does not require levona. And the Gemara now continues and analyzes the brayso. Amar Mar, the master said, Oleh shemen v'lo alechem haponim shemen, upon it, Again, upon the minchas ha'omer there is oil, but not on the lechem haponim. There's no oil by the lechem haponim. And the Gemara asks, Ema, why don't we say aleho shemen, that upon it there is oil, v'lo al minchas kohanim shemen, but not on the minchas kohanim? Say that there's oil by the minchas ha'omer, but there's no oil by the minchas kohanim. And the Gemara says, mistabra minchas kohanim havalei l'ribuye, makes more sense to include minchas kohanim, to say that it is similar to the minchas ha'omer, because it is similar in the following fashions: shekein isaron kli chutz v'tzura hagasha v'ishim. What it has in common, again, the minchas ha'omer and the minchas kohanim, they have in common isaron, that's the amount of the minchas, and isaron kli, both of them are in a vessel, which means they are both sanctified by kli shores, and chutz, both of them are prepared outside of the heichal, they're not prepared in the heichal. V'tzura, tzura means to say that they're both disqualified if they are left overnight, that's a change in appearance. Both of them have hagasha, they're brought close to the mizbeach, and both of them are ishim, both of them are burned on the fires of the mizbeach. That's what minchas kohanim and minchas ha'omer have in common, unlike the lechem haponim, and that's why the lechem haponim are excluded. But the Gemara continues and asks, Adrab, on the contrary, lechem haponim havalei l'ribui, we should include lechem haponim because they do have what in common with the minchas ha'omer in the following fashion: shekein tzibura, first of all, those are both communal offerings. Chova, they're both obligations. Tamya, they both override tumah, essentially because they're communal. Da'achil, both of them are eaten. Pigula, they both have the halachas of pigul related to them. And b'shavsa, they both override Shabbos, they can be brought on Shabbos, again also because they are communal. And so therefore we find that lechem haponim and minchas ha'omer also have things in common. So why should we say again that the minchas kohanim is the one that is included? Maybe the lechem haponim should be included. And the Gemara continues and answers, mistabra nefesh, it makes more sense to say that nefesh, it says a soul, and that is the pasuk by the fine flour mincha, which does in fact require oil, and so therefore any carbon which is brought by a nefesh, by the individual, like the minchas kohanim, is going to require oil. And the Gemara continues and analyzes the brayso. Amar Mar, the master said, Aleho levona, upon it is frankincense. Again, upon the minchas ha'omer is frankincense. Velo al minchas nesachim levona, and not on the minchas nesachim, the mincha of libations. There is no frankincense. Again, the minchas nesachim, that refers specifically to the carbon mincha that accompanies an animal carbon together with nesachim, together with libations. And so the Gemara asks, Ema, why don't we say Aleho levona, that upon the minchas ha'omer is levona, velo al minchas kohanim levona, but not upon the minchas kohanim? Maybe again we should exclude minchas kohanim. And the Gemara says, mistabra, makes sense to say minchas kohanim havalei l'ribuya, that we should include minchas kohanim because it has the following in common with the minchas ha'omer: shekein isaron bolol belug. First of all, it's an isaron, that's the amount of flour that is mixed with a lug of shemen. And mugash, again, it's brought close to the mizbeach. Biglal etzem, and biglal etzem means that it's brought on its own. It's not accompanying an animal carbon like the minchas nesachim. Both the minchas ha'omer and the minchas kohanim are brought on their own account. But the Gemara continues, Adarav, on the contrary, minchas nesachim avalei l'ribuye, we should include minchas nesachim, that also has common factors with the minchas ha'omer, which are as follows: shekein sibura, again, those are both communal karbonos, and chova, they're both obligations, ve'itmi, and they override tumah because of the fact that they're communal, and b'shab, so they override Shabbos for the same reason. And so therefore again, minchas nesachim, that really has more in common with the minchas ha'omer. And the Gemara again says mistabra nefesh, it makes sense to say nefesh. And again, what the Gemara means to say is that it says nefesh by the fine flour offering, and over there we find that there is levona, and so therefore any time where the nefesh, where the individual brings the carbon like the minchas kohanim, there is going to be levona. And Rashi explains, the Gemara asked, V'lo al minchas kohanim shemen, why don't we say that the minchas ha'omer gets oil and not the minchas kohanim? Maybe the minchas kohanim is being excluded from oil. And Rashi notes, V'o dinami leminchas noshim v'geirim, the same is true also. The Gemara could have asked, why don't we exclude minchas noshim, the mincha of women, or geirim, and they changed the gears here to ovdei kochavim, the mincha of non-Jews. The chol hanach lo ksibuhu shemen behedya. The point is, in all of these cases, it's not written shemen explicitly in the pasuk. That's what the Gemara really is suggesting, so why not exclude these cases? The chad minayu nakat. So we're just choosing one of them. We're choosing minchas kohanim, but again we could choose minchas nashim, etc. And then the Gemara said, mistabra minchas kohanim havalei l'ribuya. It makes sense to include minchas kohanim. B'chol dinei minchas ha'omer, it should be the same as minchas ha'omer. V'lo lahotzi, not to exclude it. Shekein domos yachad shtein bos isaron. They're similar. They're both an isaron of flour. K'dichsiv v'omer asiris ha'efa. It says the omer is a tenth of an ephah. That's an isaron. Ustam menachos bos isaron. In general, minchas are an isaron. Avalechem Aponim, Ksev Shnei Esronim Yehachala, but by the Lechem Aponim it says 2 Esronim. And Kli, they both require a vessel. Kol HaMenachos Tunos Kli Lolush. They all require a vessel to knead the dough. Beperek Shtei Alechem, that's in Perek Shtei Alechem. That's Shalu Es Rebbe Zu Minayin Avo Lechem Aponim Eino Nikdash Ela Betanur. The Lechem Aponim doesn't require that vessel. It is sanctified in the oven. And Chutz means Kol HaMenachos Avodasan Bachutz. All of the Menachos, their avod is outside of the Heichel. It's in the Azora. Avo Lechem Aponim Sidur Beheichel, but the Lechem Aponim that's arranged in the Heichel. V'yod HaKol Nifsalu Belina Dekotshei Kodshim Heim. They all have the disqualification of Lina if they're left overnight, because they're Kodshei Kodshim, they're the Holy of Holies. In terms of Karbonos, Vein Ne'echolas Ela Liyom, they're only eaten that day. Avo Lechem Aponim Omer Ala Shulchan Mishabbos L'Shabbos. The Lechem Aponim, that goes from week to week on the Shulchan. And Hagasha means Kol HaMenachos Tunos Hagasha. All Menachos require being brought close to the Mizbeach. V'Lechem Aponim Ein Ton Hagasha. The Lechem Aponim does not have that requirement to Tanan B'Masnis and Taipirkin, like we learn in the Mishnah in this Perek. And Ishim, the fires, Kol HaMenachos Yesh Mehen Migufan L'Ishim. All Menachos, something from the Mincha goes on the fire. The Minchas Omer Nikmetzes. The Minchas Omer even, there's a Kamitza, there's a fistful taken, Kedim Meforish, Be'elu Menachos, like we say in Elu Menachos. Uminchas Kohanim Kolo, the Minchas Kohanim is entirely burned. La'afuke Lechem Aponim De'en Migufan L'Ishim, that excludes the Lechem Aponim. Nothing is burned on the fires. Tzibor means Lechem Aponim, Uminchas Omer Korban Tzibor Heim. The Lechem Aponim and the Minchas Omer are communal karbonos. Uminchas Kohen Yachiru, the Mincha of the Kohen is an individual's carbon. Betuma, and then overriding Tuma, Ha'omer Ushtei HaLechem V'Lechem Aponim Chova. The Omer, the Shtei HaLechem, the Lechem Aponim are obligations, V'dochos Tuma, and they push off Tuma, Beperaketz Lat Solin, like we say in Peraketz Lat Solin, Hey Devorim Boim Betuma, Ve'in Echolim Betuma, Ha'omer Shtei HaLechem V'Lechem Aponim. That's what we say over there in Psachim. Avol Carbon Yachid Lo Dachi Tuma, the carbon of an individual does not override Tuma. Da'achil, and then they have in common that they're eaten, Shiori Omer Necholim the Kohanim. The remainder of the Omer is eaten by the Kohanim, V'chein Lechem Aponim, that's true of the Lechem Aponim. Avol Minchas Kohanim Kula Kolo, the Minchas Kohanim is entirely burned. Pigula, and then they have the dinim of Pigul in common, B'shari Omer, Noeg Pigul, by the remainder of the Omer. There's a concept of Pigul. Sharei Kometz Matir, and anything that has a matir, that has a permitter, there's halachas of Pigul. The Kometz is matir the Omer. Over Lechem Aponim, Noeg Pigul, by Lechem Aponim also there's Pigul. Devazichin Matir, and also because the spoons of the frankincense are the matir, they're the permitters. The Kaimulam Meseches Yuma Beparakotziu Lo Kal Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin. It says in Meseches Yuma, anytime there's a permitter, permitter means to say Bein Lo Adam Bein Lo Mizbeach, something that you do that now permits the carbon to be consumed either by people or the Mizbeach. So then Noeg Bo Pigul. Then there is a halacha Pigul over there. Avol Minchas Kohanim Kula Kolo. The Minchas Kohanim is entirely burned. Ve'in Lo Matirin, so there's no permitter. Ve'in Pigul Noeg Bo, and so therefore there is no Pigul over there. B'Shab, so they override Shabbos. The Omer Karev Afila B'Shabbos Kedamer B'Perek Rabbi Shmuel. The Omer is offered even on Shabbos, like we say in Perek Rabbi Shmuel. The Lechem Haponim Sidura B'Shabbos. The Lechem Haponim is arranged on Shabbos. Mistabra Minchas Kohanim Havalei L'Rebuye. But then the Gemara says it makes sense to include Minchas Kohanim Ibnei Sheba Mincha Ksiv Nefesh, because by Mincha in general it says Nefesh Lamanu Dechol Minchas Yachid Te'una Shemen. This teaches that all individuals' minchas require oil. Bolo, they have in common that they're mixed. Minchas Kohanim, Bolo, the Mincha Kohanim is mixed. Belug, with one lug, meaning Bechol HaMenachos Sagi Bechad Lug Lisaron. It's one lug of oil per Yisaron. Uminchas Nesachim Yesh Gimel Lug in Lisaron. By the Minchas Nesachim, it's a different amount. Mugash, it's brought close. Omer Ushar Menachos to Unos Hagash. Again, they require being brought close to the Mizbeach. V'lo Minchas Nesachim Kedim Mefarish B'Masnisin. That's not true of Minchas Nesachim. And Biglal Etzem, they come on their own. Omer Minchas Kohanim Bos Biglal Atzman, they're brought on their own. Minchas Nesachim Bo Biglal Zevach, the Mincha of libations is brought with an animal carbon. Minchas Nesachim Tzibur, and Rashi notes that the Mincha of libations is a communal carbon. Sharei Bo Im Hatzmidin, it comes together with carbon tamid. V'Omer Nami Tzibur, the Omer also is communal. L'shtei and Chova, and they're both obligations. V'dochos Shabbos v'Tumah, they push off, they override Shabbos and Tumah. Istabra Nefesh, and again, then the Gemara said it makes sense that it says Nefesh b'Mincha Solas Ksiv, by the Mincha of fine flour it says Nefesh, and therefore Ksiv Levon, it's also written Levon over there, it says Nefesh and Levona. Umehasam Gamrin and Lechol Minchas Yachid Shetuna Levona. From there we learn all minchas of individuals require Levona. And the Gemara continues at the two dots and analyzes the Braisa. Mincha, again it said in the Braisa, Mincha L'Rabos Minchas Shmini Levona. That's an inclusion. It comes to include the Mincha on the 8th day of the Miluim for Levona. The Gemara says, Ve'ema Lahotzi, why not say that we're excluding? The Gemara says, Hi, Mai, what does that mean to say? Iamre B'Shlama L'Rabos, if you're going to say we're including the Minchas Shmini Shaber, that would all make sense, because there would be a Havamina to say that we shouldn't say the same thing by Minchas Shmini, because it's Shah, it's just for that time period, so the Pasuk comes to include it. Eloi amrit lahosi, but if you're saying it's to exclude it, lamali, what do you need an exclusion for? Sham midoros lo yalfin, and we wouldn't learn something sham midoros anyway. You wouldn't learn a carbon that comes only at one time in history from something that's all generations, so it must be that it is an inclusion. Rashi explains, the amrit v'shlam l'rab l'shabra, if you say it's an inclusion, it makes sense. The salka daita chamina, because one might have thought sham midoros lo yalfin, and you don't learn sham midoros. So kamash malon, that's what it's teaching us again, that the mincha shmini is the same as, and is included with regards to lavona. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Again, the Brisa said, he, lahotzi shtei halechem, the word he in the pasuk excludes the shtei halechem that's brought on Shavuos, shelo yetanu lo shemen v'lo lavona. The shtei halechem, they do not require shemen, they don't require oil, and they do not require lavona, they don't require frankincense. The Gemara says, ve'emo lahotzi minchas kohanim. Again, why don't we say that this exclusion in the pasuk is to exclude the minchas kohanim? And the Gemara says, no, mistabra minchas kohanim havalei l'rebuye, makes sense to say that the minchas kohanim is included. Shekein isaron kli matzah ve'etzem hagosha ve'ishim, because what it has in common is isaron, again, that's the amount of flour. Kli, it's sanctified by a vessel. Matzah means to say it's matzah as opposed to chametz. Etzem means that it's brought on its own, it doesn't accompany another carbon. And hagosha, it's brought close to the mizbeach, and ishim, the fires. And the Gemara continues, adarabba, on the contrary, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis.